Great, so we'll make a start to the Performance and Overview Scrutiny meeting Tuesday the 24th of October, and welcome everybody. Councillors, committee members, officers, chief officers, and of course residents, or anyone who might be watching live or at some point in the future. We are well into the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. I don't know if you had a bit of mist and mellow fruitfulness on your way in today, as well as a few traffic lights, but we're well into autumn now, and I can see Mark's actually reflecting that in his backdrop, which is very seasonal. Mark, very well done. We'll make a start with the meeting and start with apologies for absence. I know that Councillor Buckler was unable to attend, and we're very grateful to Councillor Powell for substituting for her today. Thank you, Councillor Powell, for doing that. I don't think there are any other declarations of absence. On the second item, we have declaration of interest. Declarations of interest, have we any? None. I
haven't had any, no.
None notified. We'll move on to 3, which is public open forum. Any issues there, Robert?
No one today, Chair.
So we'll move on to the item 4 on the agenda, which is the Planning Annual Performance Report and scrutiny of the annual performance report prior to submission to the Welsh Government, and to provide performance and overview and scrutiny with a report on the performance of our Council's planning service for the financial year 2022-2023. If I may just preface remarks by asking officers to please just introduce yourselves if you're picking up any questions. We welcome Councillor Griffiths, the Cabinet Member, to the meeting, and thank you, Councillor Griffiths, for attending today. It's very helpful. Can I also just say that planning as a service and enforcement is an area that, in my experience in any council, it's an area that draws a lot of interest and quite a lot of emotion quite often, in part because people are very interested in planning applications, and the planning service very often finds itself as people being criticised, and in my experience that is not always fair criticism. We're interested today in the work of the Planning and Enforcement Service in regard to its report on performance, and that's what we'll particularly focus on. We will connect some of the backward-looking performance with how we may have some interest and some concerns about how we'll move forward effectively. So we'll start with that. And would you like to start by introducing the report, Councillor Griffiths?
Briefly, yeah. It's a requirement on the County Council that we produce this report. It is produced, it is before you. I claim 0 credit for it. It's been produced by the officers in the team. It's a report of the performance. My limited role, like yours really, is to provide oversight, and that I've attempted to do. The report is there. It doesn't indicate that everything in Monmouthshire is working perfectly. You wouldn't want a report of that sort. It says that much is being done well, but there are room for improvement, and I'm interested in your views on where we can best focus our desire to make those improvements. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. It might be appropriate, Craig, as Head of Planning, for you to take the report and perhaps summarise some of the key points before we move into questions.
Thank you, Chair. Craig O'Connor, Head of Planning at Monmouthshire County Council. Thank you, members, for helping us today to scrutinise the report, which, as Councillor Griffiths has said, is a report that we do annual basis. It's based on the Welsh Government indicators to review planning services across Wales based on 12 indicators. If it's okay, Chair, my colleague Phil Thomas, who leads on the development management team, has done a few slides to run through the report for members members, just to go through those indicators and to go through the areas that we're looking at. So if it's okay by you, Chair, I can pass to Phil just to run through those slides.
That would be great. Thank you very much. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Chair and councillors. My name's Phil Thomas. I'm Development Services Manager, so I have overall management of the development management function that deals with planning applications, planning enforcement, heritage, etc. So I'll just share my screen. I'll be quite brief with the slides because I know some of you will be familiar, or many of you will be familiar with the actual format of the annual performance report from last year as well. So, okay, what's wrong with that? Right, sorry, can you see that? Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so this looks back at the previous year. We're always looking back at a year because that's the full year that we've got data on our performance. So it's broadly divided into 5 sections. We're plan making, efficiency, quality, engagement and enforcement, and Welsh Government have a performance framework based around those topic areas. We're not looking at plan making. That's more than adequately covered in the annual monitoring report, which I believe is coming to you in November for scrutiny. But we've had to use our own back office system data because Welsh Government haven't done the comparable All Wales data since pre-pandemic times. So we're really looking at our own performance based on last year's performance of our own performance and 2018-19 All Wales data. We haven't got that data available to us, I'm afraid, to look back at the last few years. In terms of how we did in 2022-23, in brief, the sort of main highlights are that in terms of the proportion of applications we determined within agreed timescales, that did improve. It went up from 81% to 89% in 2022-23 compared to the previous year, and that's well above the Welsh Government good target of 80%. The average time to determine all applications unfortunately did increase to 110 days. It was 106 in the previous year, and we have reasons why that went up. That's partly owing to filling posts that were, we had quite a turnover of staff in the previous year, and that took time to actually then bed in terms of dealing with planning applications. We also had the impact of phosphate pollution in the centre and north of the county, which led to us asking for much more detailed drainage information than we would have hitherto, that constraint coming into play. So that's dealt with quite that's led to quite a long increase in time to turn around applications, and indeed we've had to start refusing some applications because they can't actually resolve the phosphate pollution issue. And then the proportion of major applications determined within agreed timescales was 71%. But again, we've only got the Welsh average in 2018-19, which was last at 68%, so we were above that. But you're only talking about low numbers of applications, only 7 in total, 5 of which were determined within agreed timescales. We're reasonably good at dealing with listed building applications in a timely manner. 75% of those were determined within approved timescales, and we deal with generally far more applications of that nature than nearby authorities. I think we dealt with over 60 applications last year for listed building consent. We also provide a heritage service for Blaenau Gwent Council as well, although, as you can imagine, because of the character of that area, they have far fewer applications, so we're able to help them on that. And obviously we do charge for that service. The percentage of applications that were approved remained high at 94%, which is a good reflection of our pre-application advice service. We do try and weed out what we call the no-hopers and give solid advice to ensure that when applications are submitted, they generally have a smoother path towards a positive outcome. We have a 100% success rate of applications that went to decision that followed our pre-application advice, so that's linked in to the approval rate. The area where we have need to improve clearly, and you'll have picked this up yourself from reading the report, is the enforcement performance. While we did improve one of the performance indicators, that went up from 55 to 62% in terms of investigations within 84 days. It did decline in respect to the average time to take positive action, but we have got information on how we're doing more recently on that to show that we are improving. And importantly, and in terms of helping the community understand the benefits of new development in the area, we did secure over $4 million towards important community infrastructure over the period due to the grant of larger planning applications, for instance the 2 in Dundee, and that's led to important infrastructure like the Mega Hub being built, which has been a long-awaited development in Mega and Dundee. So, there we go. I just thought I'd put this slide in. It's something that you may recall from last year. This is a toolkit that was developed in collaboration with Welsh Government, the Royal Town Planning Institute and ARUP, for each local authority to feed in its own data to work out how it was contributing to the local economy. So by adding together the allocations in the development plan, our determination of applications, the Section 106 income we derive from new planning applications, and the taking of enforcement action, it's estimated that we've pulled in about £84.7 million to the local economy during that period. And then this is...
Just briefly, if I could just say for any residents watching that they will find that chart on page 6 of the cover report, because it's a little difficult to read unless you've just been to Specsavers.
Yeah. Yes, quite.
Other brands are available.
Yeah. It's it's a toolkit, so it's quite difficult to actually change it, the text on it. But we'll look at that another time, see if we can make it a bit bigger. This is the performance framework, so this is common to all authorities, planning authorities in Wales, the Welsh Government developed, and it's a traffic lit system. Good is green with the various parameters for each measure. Fair is yellow or amber, and red needs improvement. I won't go through absolutely all of the indicators, but you can see there are 6 greens, if we look at the other column, other table as well. 4 amber and 2 in need of improvement. In terms of what items that I've not actually mentioned, it might be worth saying that in terms of percentage of member-made decisions against officer advice, that was at 6%, which is fair. You're only talking about 2 decisions in total that went contrary to officer recommendation, and I think it's good to have a debate at committee anyway. It shows that there's a healthy, if you like, interaction between officers and members, and officers obviously aren't always right. Sometimes members make good and sound decisions contrary to the officer recommendation. So there's nothing of concern, or I wouldn't have any anxiety about that particular figure. It shows a good relationship between officers and members, I think. And in terms of percentage of appeals dismissed, that was 7 out of 11, which is just below the target we want. But again, you're only talking about low numbers, and we don't get that many appeals in Monmouthshire, partly because we're good with the pre-application advice of weeding out the no-hopers that might end up at appeal, which is a waste, let's face it. And in terms of enforcement, those 2 are the red measures. The first measure did actually improve on the year before, went up from 55 to 62%, but there was a decline in the average time to take positive enforcement action, which went up to 290 days. We have taken a lot of measures to actually improve that element of the service. The enforcement team is only small. The previous year before, we had significant staffing issues with staff either being then leaving that department or being redeployed into the applications team. So at one stage, we only had about 33% of the team in post. That then led to a backlog, and I think it's taken time to turn, if you like, the oil tanker around and get the service back into the shape we want. There's signs of it in terms of the first measure there, but if I can point to the highlighted text on the right, in Q1 for the current year, the first measure went up to 82%, which would be green, and the lower measure went down to 187 days in terms of taking positive enforcement action. So that would be now fair. And we think that the Q2 data, which is about to come out, but is unfortunately not quite ready for this committee, is looking promising as well. So we're hoping we've got a bit more of a sustained improvement in that service due to the hard work done by my colleagues in that team to meet targets and have a more structured approach in terms of writing reports and making sure they hit those targets. Key activity is there. I won't go through absolutely everything. The first one is very important. It's the replacement of the LDP, and I'm sure you've been in lots of meetings about that in various stages of the plan. We do provide pre-application advice. We secure planning permission for new major developments, some of which are set out in the report, as you can see in the nice photos. We've got evidence of that, and I'll show you some slides right at the end which provides evidence that things are actually being built. If we do approve permission, they do actually get built. It's not just something that sits on the shelf and never happens. We do provide an important heritage service, have a lot of listed building conservation areas, and we do seek to take robust enforcement action against unauthorised development, and we served 14 notices last year. And we work, important point at the end, we work with NRW and Welsh Water and other agencies to provide sustainable development while not contributing to the nutrient pollution issues in the rivers, Y&S catchments, which has been a real problem for us and the wider community in more recent years. So we've identified 4 actions going forward. We're looking to digitise older planning applications that are still held on microfiche. That will reduce the time of support staff and duty officers, and it would mean that residents don't have to come into the office to view those. And then we want to make positive change to the enforcement function and keep that on the agenda until we see sustained improvement in the measures for that particular service. And we also want to digitise the enforcement notice register to help customers self-serve. We want to finalise the building at risk strategy to manage and prioritise any actions to enable key heritage assets to be rehabilitated, if you like, for future generations. And we want to make sure we continue to invest in our staff. We've now got quite a few newer, younger members of staff. We want to ensure that the professional qualifications are achieved by them and they continue to have professional development so that they remain loyal to us and provide a really good positive contribution to the team. Those are just final slides showing some good developments that have happened, all involving affordable housing. Top left is in Devorden, which was a mixed what we call 60-40 site. So 60% affordable, 40% market housing to help fund the scheme. Top right is an interesting, innovative group of bungalows that were built in Abergavenny on a site of an old garage block. They've really revitalised the area. Similar bottom left, similar scenario in Caldicot, and bottom right was an innovative Muse development in Bulwark. All affordable. And then that's a final slide just showing the artist's impression of Abergavenny King Henry VIII School on the left, and then it's actually being built on the ground, so things are happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, and also, it's very noticeable, and I appreciate, that you clearly take a lot of pride in the outcomes of good planning, and I think it's great to see that. We all share that pride when things move forward well, and we have concerns when they don't. So we'll be focusing on both those areas. One of your comments I notice is already trending on all social platforms. If I could quote you, "Officers aren't always right," which is a fantastic confession, and all social platforms are now trending nationally on that particular point, so you'll find yourself getting, I'm sure, lots of questions about that later on. But thank you. That one was a gift. I couldn't avoid it, Phil. So just looking at questions from colleagues, if you could raise your hand on the chat if you have any questions, it would be very helpful. And I see Jill, you have, Councillor Bond, you have a question to ask. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the input, Phil and Craig. Brilliant work, great work you've been doing, especially considering the resource issues that you've had and you've explained to us. Thank you for that, and it's been a pleasure to work on be part of the planning committee and learning a lot from you. A couple of questions. The enforcement difficulties or delays that you've had with resource, completely understand, and it's sorted now, you say. I wonder what happened to the backlog. How have you managed to overcome that backlog? Because as you say, you're picking up now and all looking good. I wonder on page 6, I think, about the affordable houses, what that actually equates to, that amount. Perhaps it was later and I missed it, but what are we expecting more in 23-24 for the input from the affordable houses? The 110k for consultancies fees, I wonder if you could just explain that a little bit, please, what's used on. I wonder, this is just a comment, I wonder if the council use lean principles to help look at your processes and help determine waste and improve things. We probably do. You'd mentioned that the consultees, the planning committee, I don't remember it coming to the planning committee. I don't think I was asleep, but I may have been, but I'm sorry if I did. Sorry, there's a slight mistake, I think, on page 28. It's because the number of applications received is less than those determined for this year. Okay, that's it, thank you. Sorry, that was a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And the quotes are coming thick and fast this morning. Councillor Bond says she might have been asleep at the planning committee. It's all good stuff. But if,
I wasn't.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. I know you were not. But could I ask Craig, Phil, to address those points, perhaps, and starting with the backlog issue and just how that's moving forward?
Yeah, that's fine. In terms of the backlog, it's having people in post really to actually do the work, because as I suggested, the previous year was really difficult. We had people who were poorly in the enforcement team and then left. One got a job in another authority, and I won't go into the detail, but at that stage we had 33% in post. There's only 3 of them, so as you imagine, so you got one person doing the work of, and Andrew, to be fair, helping as manager, but he's also managing part of the application teams as well. So you just need people in post to actually catch up on the work. So we've now fully staffed. We have a senior enforcement officer, a more junior enforcement officer, and an enforcement monitoring officer who does a lot of the sort of qualitative work in terms of making sure that conditions are discharged and complied with that add quality to a scheme. Ensuring the landscaping's done, materials are properly applied on the development. They haven't value engineered something without us knowing. So we've got the people in post now to actually do the work, and that part of the reason that final measure went up to 290 days was because they were dealing with the backlog and they had to close some of the older cases that have built up over the time. And that I'm convinced now that we'll see a proper turnaround of that performance indicator, so that reduction in time from end to end of the enforcement process comes down now that we've got more people there. So I hope I've answered that. Andrew?
Come back on that.
Yeah?
So we haven't changed the standard by which we follow things up or anything, just to cover this time to help remove the backlog.
No, we haven't changed the standard. If anything, we're a bit more systematic about how we go about looking at applications, and we report things. For instance, they have to be considered at delegation panels in terms of what we call expediency reports. So we're more we're sharper and more focused in terms of noting deadlines. We're not letting things run over the 84 days that might have happened when we had fewer resources to manage that process. We're actually much better at focusing on that particular performance measure. Now we've got more people in to do the work, and it's a more straightforward process to manage for Andrew and the team. Sorry, does that answer the question on the backlog? Or yeah. In terms of the other items, the
Consultant fees, yeah.
Yeah, consultancy fees, that covers not only us but also the development plan team. And as you can imagine, when you're reviewing a development plan, you need a lot of expert advice on things like site viability, economic indicators and input. As far as development management, the planning application process is concerned, we use consultants occasionally, not very often, but we'll use them, for instance, when we get an application for a rural enterprise dwelling, and that's quite a technical area, so we do need some input from that consultant who's got far more experience about farming methods, man hours, that sort of thing. So it's not a massive amount, but it does add up, as you can imagine, if we get several applications a year for that sort of type of development. We've also had a few One Planet developments, and if anybody was at the seminar recently on that, they know it's a highly technical area to assess. So we have used consultants on about 3 applications over the year on One Planet development. So you can easily find yourself spending 5,000 on an application per consultant, you know. So yeah, but the replacement LDP will obviously have more input in terms of consultancy costs. I mean, Craig, you would know more about that than I, really, but it can lead to significant amounts, hence the 110,000. In terms of lean processes, we did go through well, it was a significant systems thinking review of the whole team about 10 years ago, and that's embedded in the system now. So any change we then take forward, for instance, you know, Craig was part of that. The majority of the team that remain were part of that process, and we try and then induct new members into that way of thinking by identifying problems, working out what that problem is, what we're trying to solve, use the problem-solving tool, and then work forward with solutions via team working, so that the team buys into that process of change, and then implement that. So yes, we have done a lean review, if you like, and we'd like to think that's well established in our team in terms of tackling waste, and we've used that in terms of making positive change in the enforcement team. Is that all right?
Planning committee consultation. Yeah, please, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bond, for the questions. I think Phil's covered off most of them. With regards to the consultation with Planning Committee, yes, unfortunately that was supposed to be on the agenda for October, but it is going to Planning Committee in November now. So I've spoken to the Chair, it will be coming in November, so be able to feed into that report. We've got to send this report off to Welsh Government, so we can certainly feed Planning Committee's comments into that, Jill, for you. That's no problem at all.
You don't go to sleep in meetings.
No, you certainly don't. With regards to the consultation fees, I think Phil's covered off most of it, but we certainly need that expertise sometimes. Planning is very controversial. Sometimes we have legal challenges we have to defend in terms of the council. So some of those fees are justified. I would suggest they're quite small compared to other councils across Wales in terms of their consultation fees, but it's certainly something that I think is validated, and we certainly review all costs and expenditure that we do. And I think that's quite clear at the minute in terms of the budget challenges that we have in the council. I think all members are aware of the current challenges we face, and in some of the actions that Phil has outlined for next year, such as digitising the service in both the enforcement service and also the wider microfiche. Some of those items are challenging, and we are considering whether we can go ahead with them at the moment. So that might be something that we'll have to talk about next year when we look at the APR in terms of whether those targets were achievable given those budget constraints. And we also have sort of vacancy freezes at the moment, which is affecting the team. So it might have an impact next year, but just to sort of flag that with members in terms of an ongoing concern for us with resources. One of the other questions you mentioned, Jill, was about affordable housing. Sorry, Councillor Bond, was about affordable housing and the lack of, and so you've seen some of the photographs and images that Phil has outlined in the presentation. We've done, I believe we've done some really good stuff out there in the county in terms of delivering those affordable houses. One thing I would suggest is going forward, in terms of, you mentioned, Councillor Bond, about opportunities going forward. This is directly linked into the lifespan of our development plan. We don't have many sites left, in fact very little now. In terms of the affordable housing sites in our rural areas, we have 15 sites allocated, 8 of those have been delivered. We're running out of land ultimately to deliver these affordable housing sites, which is why we need the progression of the replacement local development plan to give us land to develop the affordable housing that certainly Councillor Griffiths is and the administration are pushing for in terms of that 50% provision of affordable housing-led schemes. So going forward, I think there's a session for members on Wednesday evening about affordable housing, when we can pick up this point really in terms of looking at affordable housing permissions over the last few years and how they have reduced over time, because unfortunately, positive, the sites have come forward in the LDP, but we haven't got many other sites now to build out.
Thank you, Craig. And Councillor Griffiths, I see you wanted to come in.
Thanks very much, Chair. Councillor Bond, you raised the issue of consultancy in the function of planning. My experience over the last year has been that we make limited use of consultancy in the development control function, but in the preparations for our local development plan, a lot of work going on there, and it's been very useful to call in resources externally. So, for instance, over the last year, we've had a lot of work and a report on our economic profile as a county. That report's in the public domain. I think it makes interesting reading. A statistic that I take around with me almost daily from that report is that over 99% of the land which is currently available for employment use is occupied. So it illustrates, we often think of planning in terms of residential development, but in terms of economic opportunity, we're operating at over 99% capacity. We've run out of land. And to me, that shows the significance of the local development plan, which we'll be debating in Council on Thursday. And again, Councillor Bond, you raised the issue of affordable housing. Again, land at a premium. I think most of those illustrations that you've got there probably came from Welsh Government funded in part the Housing Innovation Programme, and they are innovative schemes and very welcome, but we need to learn from them. In more mainstream development, the existing local development plan leaves the proportion of affordable housing to be a matter of negotiation site by site, and on viability studies those negotiations have not always delivered the ambition of that plan in terms of affordable housing. The local development plan, the replacement local development plan we'll debate on Thursday, is intended to have a specific requirement in the plan that all sites will have 50% affordable housing, and that will not be for site-by-site negotiation. If a landowner or a developer fails to come with a proposal to achieve that proportion, the development will not go ahead. We will make the local development plan that robust that the inspector will not overturn decisions made by this council on application by application. So most of the report before you today is covering, quite rightly, operational matters, but those questions raised policy matters, which we can come back to in the debate on Thursday.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Just on that particular issue, I was wondering whether the table that we've just looked at, which summarises LDP value for 22-23 at 2.1 million uplift that Phil was just sharing with us, I wasn't clear that that was reflecting the RLDP value. It cannot possibly do. And I know that we were interested in that expression of value being so important coming from a planning department, so we don't always associate a planning service with an expression of the value of planning. I think it's really helpful to see that. And I suppose the question there, Councillor Griffiths, is whether or not the RLDP does a clear enough job of expressing what the added value is within the RLDP, but that may be one to consider outside the meeting, Councillor Griffiths. It would seem like a really helpful thing to do. Yeah, great, thank you.
It's a bit of an aside, but I've had this debate in other places. When a planning consent is achieved, that's important. That allows us to develop. It makes employment opportunities. It gives residential opportunities. It increases the value of the land, sometimes hugely. So land without a planning consent, agricultural value compared with development value, huge difference. And it intrigues me that my colleagues in the planning profession claim that that uplift in value should be ascribed to the planning profession in total.
I can only commend them for their ingenuity, but it's a competitive world. Well done. But okay, thank you. I'm going to move to other questions. I see Councillor Fuchs has, you've raised your hand. Councillor Fuchs.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm Councillor Fuchs. I'm Councillor for Town Ward in Monmouth. So thank you for this report. It's great to see the value that planning brings into our county. I've got 3 questions. So number 1, we say that one of the priorities is continuing a joint heritage service for Monmouthshire and Blaenau Gwent. And I just wanted to check if this was value for money for us and if we receive sufficient funding for this service from Blaenau Gwent to cover our costs. But also, does this take, I know the heritage team is stretched, so does this take us away from valuable work in Monmouthshire? So that's question 1. Question 2 is around Section 106 monies. Obviously delighted to see that £4 million has been generated for projects for use with this money, and I think one of the best examples is, of course, the Magor Hub. But could we have a list of all Section 106 projects that have been have benefited from funding in the past year? Because I think it's very important that they all are strong community projects that are supported with this money, because I know in other areas, for example, they may put kind of artwork outside a building, which doesn't really have any community benefit, particularly in my opinion. And I just want to make sure that we are spending our Section 106 monies on really good community projects. So that was the second question. And then my third and final question is, we say in Section 6.10, we are developing our buildings at risk strategy. I can see that's incredibly important. In my ward, there are there are a significant amount of listed buildings, some of which are at risk in the Monmouth area. So I just want to make sure that, well, number 1, how will we expedite this strategy ASAP? When are we going to get it? And secondly, kind of, I guess this is question 3A, on our heritage applications, anecdotal evidence around listed building consent has come to light for me, where we are interpreting some of the rules very rigidly. And this sometimes means that a listed building will stay undeveloped, falling down, an eyesore, for example. So how do our officers make sure that they get the balance right between applying the law, which they must do at all times, but allowing development of these incredible listed buildings we're so fortunate to have in Monmouthshire?
Thank you, Councillor Fuchs. I don't know who wants to take that one on. Phil, Craig?
I've actually messaged the heritage manager to join us, because some of that detail is quite good for Amy Longford to get involved in. I can certainly start on some of the issues.
Amy's just joined us online. I don't know if we start perhaps with the Blaen y Gwent one and the value and the stretch issues.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say to that is that in terms of the amount of work that is involved with Blaen y Gwent, you're only talking about probably 3, maybe 4 applications over an entire year. We do get paid for them, but I think we can manage that level of work without it impinging upon our own service. And we do charge them an hourly rate, which is, a fair rate. We're not looking to make excessive amounts out of them, but Amy can maybe provide a bit more flesh on the bones of what I've said there.
Well, I just see, Amy, did you want to come in on that particular point?
I don't think Amy should do that.
Yeah, thank you. I've literally just joined and heard Phil's comments, so would you mind just quickly repeating the question, because I haven't been party to the previous.
Sorry, Amy. First of all, thanks. I do appreciate your joining the meeting at, like no notice whatsoever. So thank you. But you can blame your colleague for that after the meeting. That's for sure. We were looking at the impact of Blaen y Gwent, the joint working and the agreement that we have with Blaen y Gwent, and the extent to which that draws activity away from what we might be looking to do in Monmouthshire, and whether that is expressed in good value to us. I think was the overall question there.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It was something that we looked at very carefully before we entered into the agreement with them. The service level agreement with Blaen y Gwent is based on a minimum service demand, so it's based on, if I remember off the top of my head, a couple of listed building consent applications. I think there's 2 listed building consent applications that we would deal with, about 3 pre-application discussions, and about 5 consultations on planning applications. Their level of heritage in terms of their numbers of historic buildings, they've got 55 listed buildings in their area. To put us in context, we're just under 2,500. So their level of service is a bit like a minimum fluctuation in what we would see over an annual year. So that's something that we can easily absorb with the team and wouldn't detract us from any MCC work.
I mean, that's really helpful. Thank you very much. I'm sure Councillor Fuchs is grateful for that clarification too. And Craig, did you want to come in on that before we then move on to Section 106?
I was just going to come in to answer the question about Section 106. So if I run on to that.
Perfect.
Yes, Councillor Fuchs. Yes, that would be certainly something that we can give you as a list of the Section 106 monies that we have secured via those in terms of that £4 million over the last year. What I would say is, unfortunately, at this stage, you wouldn't see any sort of dividends of that in terms of projects at the moment. So they're allocated to projects and sit within the council, and that money is then ring-fenced for those projects. But it might take a number of years for those projects to come online. But there's certainly, when an application comes in within the planning committee report, there'll be outlines in terms of what Section 106 money has been gained from that particular planning application, and also what projects they're going to be allocated to. But in the future, maybe in next year's APR, we'll certainly put it within the report, and also we can follow up with that information for members of the Scrutiny Committee, so that everyone can see it going forward. But you'll see that it's allocated, but you might not see that project come through to 3, 4, 5 years. For instance, the Velo Park in Abergavenny, that project we secured money from many years ago, and it's still waiting to be spent. So it might sit with us within the council for a number of years, but that is ring-fenced, it is protected for those community infrastructure projects to bring some of those developments online. But we can certainly share that information going forward. That's no problem at all. In terms of the building risk strategy, I might pass on to Amy at the minute. Amy's team is vigorously working on this at the moment. It's certainly a task that we've had for a number of years, but there's certainly momentum now to deliver it. Now that Amy's got a full team, we do also have a vacancy at the moment, which we're currently recruiting for, which is really positive in terms of us having that high percentage of listed buildings within our county. That role, the heritage monitoring role, officer role, is certainly needed to protect our listed buildings. And I know, Councillor Fuchs, that you've had, you've got some significant buildings in Monmouth Town Centre which need to be looked at, and I know they're certainly on our radar, and you're having those meetings with Amy quite regularly. I mean, Amy, would you like to give an update in terms of the building at risk register, where you are, what work's been done to date, and hopefully sort of a timeline of when we're looking to deliver?
Amy, could I just pop in for a second there? What the particular focus was around included the getting the balance right between applying the law and at the same time allowing for development of what might be buildings that are, falling into disrepair or potentially collapsing, but might be at risk of one form or another. So it'd be great if you could mop that particular question up at the same time. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think from the chat, it looks like there's two questions there, that how we apply kind of listed building legislation and how we manage our listed buildings, and how we're managing our buildings at risk. So if I do the buildings at risk bit first, we have looked at trying to provide an action plan. So it's looking at all our listed buildings in the county, considering them by their condition, their location, their prominence, their importance, a number of different factors, and then distilling that down to a real action plan where we can target, for example, around about 10 buildings based on the resources that we have, and looking at the legislative tools that we have available to us to facilitate change and to get those buildings back into use, back into a good condition, so that they are making a contribution not only to historical and cultural value, but also to they have an economic value and a role to play. For example, there are a number of buildings that we mentioned in Monroe Street that we've got particular attention to those. They are definitely on the action plan. Where they are and how we tackle those is going to be based on which of the tools that we have in our kind of arsenal, really, that are most appropriate to get long-term change. So as Catherine knows, we've been discussing the one on Monroe Street in particular. That's definitely on the radar, and we have some kind of action plans for that. So in terms of timescale, I'm hoping to get that action plan developed with and out for consultation early next year. So we'd be looking to bring that into those timescales, essentially.
Thank you.
Yeah. Answer the BAR question, and I'll answer the other.
Yeah, I think it does. I can see Councillor Griffiths was looking to come in also on this point. Councillor Griffiths.
Yeah, just a couple of reflections. One on the 106 agreements. Councillor Fuchs suggested that they can be tokenistic. Decades ago, I've seen such arrangements, the odd swing here or there. That's not my experience in Monmouthshire, and I reflect on the debate that we had in this chamber on the sequencing of school investment on Caldicott and Portskewitt. Differences of opinion about which was to come first, but what was significant was there were two major school projects adding up to over £1.5 million, which were being substantially funded by Section 106 agreements. So I think that illustrates the value we can get from that process. On the sharing of our heritage, service, the Blaen y Gwent example has been mentioned. I signed off an individual cabinet member decision last week where our service will offer support for the development of the former ICI buildings in Mamead, in Torfaen, very important buildings. And I would defend the fact that we have arrangements in Welsh local government where, on a rational stroke commercial basis, we share the resources of one authority with another. It makes no sense for Blaen y Gwent to have its own service, nor indeed Torfaen. We're a centre of excellence, but we sell that excellence on a commercial basis to neighbouring authorities. I think that's sensible.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. I see in the chat also that Councillor Fuchs, you've requested a list of current Section 106 projects, and that Craig O'Connor and Mark Hand, I think you're happy to see if we could pull this together, which I think will be very useful as well. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to questions. I think we dealt with those ones. I'm going to ask Councillor Pavia. I see your hand up next on the list.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Councillor Paul Pavia, the elected member for Mount Pleasant in Chepstow. I've got two questions to officers which are linked around data, and I've got one question to the Cabinet member on strategy, if that's okay, Chair.
Yes, it is indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It is important that our residents and Welsh Government can place a high degree of reliance on our data integrity to enable us to make accurate and informed decisions. So how accurate is the collection and collation of planning services data, and what are our data integrity and quality assurance arrangements? My second question, whilst collecting data regarding those national performance indicators is important, as the report states, the focus is very much on decision speed and customer service from the applicant's end, rather than measuring whether or not better planning outcomes have been achieved. And I think it's the outcomes for development and the impact on the wider community that I'm interested in, and that my residents who have contacted me on planning issues are interested in. Now, the report states it has not been possible to identify an objective way of measuring outcomes. However, we seek to prioritise securing the best scheme possible rather than traditional indicators relating to speed of decision making. So how are we securing the best possible scheme as stated in the report? Can you unpack that statement to give us a bit more context to that, please? And have we approached any academic institutions to work with the authority to develop those outcome measurements, which I think would be really, really beneficial to both to the authority and to the residents of Monmouthshire? My final question to the Cabinet member. Now, the Cabinet member may have well read the Audit Wales report on Powers Planning Service that was published in May this year. In the executive summary, it states, it is clear there are significant cultural, strategic and operational challenges in the planning service. These include performance governance arrangements, workforce development and strategic and corporate alignment. It is therefore surprising and concerning that the Council was corporately unaware of the scale and detail of these challenges and how they are impacting the effectiveness, efficiency, performance and staff, and that the challenges have not been brought to its attention to address them sustainably. So the question to the Cabinet member, since coming into role, have you fundamentally reviewed the Council's planning function? And what guarantees can you provide to this committee that if the planning function was inspected by an external body like Audit Wales, that we too would not be found seriously wanting? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. So could I ask, first of all, Craig or Phil to address the first question, which is around data and quality assurance?
Perhaps if I answer that particular question. So we've got a back office system, and it's a common system to a lot of authorities in Wales that use it, IDOC uniform. obviously it relies on data being entered correctly, but there is a quality check. We do run a report for the development management quarterly return that's submitted to Welsh Government each quarter that a lot of this information is then taken from. It is thoroughly checked by my colleagues in the support team. The business support managers take great care in checking it. I do a second check. For instance, we'll check that the category of development that's been entered is correct by doing a very large sample of those, which we find manageable per quarter. I wouldn't want to do it all the year, but per quarter it's manageable. So we're confident that the data being input into the system and then the ones we get reports on is accurate for submission to Welsh Government. So I hope that answers the question. We obviously publish then online using the public access system, and then applications can be viewed online. But that information then is obviously not the data itself that we measure things with. That's the plans, drawings, reports, etc. that neighbours can then comment on, and that we try to ensure is as accurate as possible as well. But that's not the data we get the information for this sort of report on. Does that answer the question, Councillor Pavia?
Yeah, I think the first part of the question, and the second part, if someone else can pick that up, or yourself, Phil, on in relation to the
how we measure outcomes and quality.
Yeah.
I think Craig's going to answer that one.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. This is a really it's an interesting topic across Wales, really, in terms of planning services. How do you manage good planning outcomes in terms of design, in terms of built development, where we allocate land? It's really, really subjective, and it's a difficult point. I think in Monmouthshire we try and do it by ensuring that we review our decisions with our planning committee. So we go out on an annual basis, where we take the planning committee out, we review decisions we've made, look at design. We have sort of general workshops to try and establish exactly what members want from development proposals. As officers, we go out as well and we do those reviews and look at design practice. I know I sit on the Planning Officer Society for Wales, and this conversation does come up quite significantly. How can we get a measurement that sort of reviews design across Wales, and how can we adequately compare apples with apples, if you like, compare the development in Vale compared to a development in Monmouthshire? And I think it is all about context. Every area in Wales is different. Every design is subjective, and it might be different people in a room have different ideas on development. But the work we've done with the Design Commission for Wales is about ensuring that context is looked at and thinking about how that development sits within that settlement and how it links to the local characteristics of the area. So it's a difficult topic, Councillor Pavia, and I think more work needs to be done. But I think in Monmouthshire we certainly try and review our decisions. We try and keep going back and looking at them. And as Phil alluded to earlier, we certainly don't always get it right, and I don't think any planning application, if over the year there are going to be some developments where you think actually we should have done X, Y, and Z differently. But it is a learning process, and I think as we move forward, it's just about constantly reviewing, constantly absorbing new technologies with regards to sustainability and energy. And we're talking about net zero carbon now. This is going to change development as we move forward as well. So I think as long as we keep having those review workshops and keep looking at developments and keep criticising and critically appraising developments, that's what we can do for now. And on a national basis, we can certainly look at ensuring that we have looking at some sort of design manual or something to look at. I mean, we have signed up in Monmouthshire to be part of the placemaking charter. So we're one of the only local planning authorities across Wales which have signed up to that placemaking charter with the Design Commission for Wales to show that we have that credentials, that we are looking to create places rather than just any forms of development. And there's 6 criteria within that charter that we try and adhere to, which is character, distinctiveness, ensuring our developments accord with that. So we are working in that scope to ensure that we do have the best development development in Monmouthshire, and we don't want to focus on time. So the decision making is about 8 weeks, and in 8 weeks' time you could refuse a planning application and just throw the application out. But we try and work with the customer, try and work with developments and with local residents as well to ensure that development reflects what we want to see on that site in the long term, rather than issuing refusals within 8 weeks. That's not the kind of service that we want to deliver. We want to try and encourage the right type of development in the right places. So hopefully that's tried to answer some of the areas. I think the main thing is we do critically appraise those developments. We are part of the placemaking charter in Wales, and we will keep working with a local planning authority to see if there is a way that we can, quantitatively assess development proposals.
Craig, could I just also remind you about the question of any academic external groups are they involved in any way?
Well, Design Commission for Wales is sort of the standard for planning, and we have done some work with Cardiff University in relation to graduate jobs and roles, and I've been working with them to try and encourage people to come in that way, but not in relation to assessing development proposals. Maybe it's something that we can look at. I know in Scotland they've got a design, like a way to assess development, a design criteria. I can't remember what it's called now, but they have got something in Scotland they've adopted, and we are looking at it in Wales whether we can do something similar. But this is an ongoing conversation. Maybe it is something that we can talk to Cardiff University about to see if there is something that we can do there as well. So maybe that's an idea we can take away, Chair.
Thank you, that's very helpful. And the question to Councillor Griffiths in regard to the concluding question being if planning were to be assessed externally, if you could possibly address that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Pavia. I've not read the Wales Audit's review of the Powys Planning Service, but now that you've brought it to my attention, I'll take a good look at it. I'll try to identify what triggered that review, what problems it found, what remedies it suggested, and whether we can learn from it. In terms of our own monitoring and scrutiny, there was an internal audit in the last year. That audit was approved by our own Governance and Audit Committee. In addition, this is the second time that this scrutiny committee, since I've been in post, has been doing it annually, has looked at the performance report that you've got. I think it's a fair assessment to say that with relatively slim resources, we have a service that is performing well in many aspects, but with room for improvement in other aspects. My response to that thus far is not to initiate a fundamental review, but is to continue with our continuous review through this scrutiny, through our internal audit mechanisms, through my own oversight. That is the way we've been proceeding, and unless I can find, as for instance in the Powys report, some reason to believe that there is some fundamental issue, I'm not minded to instigate a fundamental review.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths and Craig, and if you could keep it brief because we need to move on to other questions.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to build on Councillor Griffiths to give members the sort of information with regards to what was looked at part of that audit. It looked at the operational risk controls, adequately mitigating the legislative and policy risks. It looked at the application of operation controls efficiently and effectively and mitigate against the risks. And it also examined the operational risk control management information reports are accurate, timely and user-focused. And the conclusion of that audit, Councillor Pavia, was that there was substantial assurance. It found that it was a sound system of governance and the risk management and controls exist within the system. So that audit report was quite very positive, really, in terms of ensuring that it's delivering a good service for the council. So just to give members that bit of detail, really, in terms of that audit report.
Thank you, Craig. If I may, just before moving on to the next set of questions from Councillor Howells, I know, Amy, I think you were trying to come back on the question that Councillor Fuchs had raised about getting the balance right between the application of the law and enabling development. So can I possibly ask you just to go back to that particular question and see if you could address that? Thank you, Amy.
No problem, thank you. Yeah, I'll be quick. I know we've got a lot to get through. So yeah, in relation to listed buildings, buildings are only included on the list when they're of national importance. So it's far more than a local or a regional thing. It is quite a high bar to get onto the list. And the legislative framework that surrounds that is set out in primary legislation, in an act, a specific act, and Wales is quite forward in that respect, that we've recently consolidated different historic environment acts into one, which just shows a commitment to a clearer process, really. And now how we interpret that is more about managing change rather than the avoidance of harm. So when we get listed building consent applications, we do try our best to try and negotiate to a successful conclusion, try and look at alternative solutions of being able to facilitate what an applicant would be looking for, and long-term sustainable futures for these buildings. Some buildings are more capable of change than others, and I think that is something where the guidance can sometimes get slightly misconstrued, but we do feel that we try and be as pragmatic and as open as possible to change. For example, there's lots of applications at the moment for PV panels on listed buildings and making your listed building more energy efficient. And we have quite a high approval rate for PV panels on listed buildings, and we do try and accommodate those where we can and try and look at those in a very positive way. I'm not saying we're going to approve everything we get in terms of our applications. There will always be applications that will be unacceptable, but we will have tried to negotiate to a successful conclusion before we reach the point of refusing an application.
Thank you, Amy, for that. And we're going to move on now to Councillor Howells and questions you may have.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Marion Howells for the Llanbadach and Usk ward. I have a few questions. First one regards Welsh Government. It's unfortunate there's no recent comparative data. Are Welsh Government likely to introduce it in future years? I've got a question on phosphate. So it's good news that Dŵr Cymru or Welsh Water are addressing the phosphate issue by installing phosphate stripping technology in Monmouth and Llanfoist. However, are we sure that this technology is adequate for the extra demand, and will there be a betterment in the existing poor phosphate levels? My third question was, again, on planning applications, on the measure of planning applications. So is the proportion of applications being approved a valid measure of performance? A high approval rate could also indicate a lack of scrutiny of the planning application. I'm sure that's not right, but I just want to hear how confident are we that the approvals are in line with planning policy? My fourth question, no, sorry, that was already covered with the, well, I'll just go the enforcement aspect. Enforcement performance is low, and we have anecdotal reports of that failure, of our failure to address continued planning breaches is bringing our planning system into a bit of a disrepute, potentially encouraging others to breach regulations. But I think you've already addressed how soon that will be, the backlog will be cleared, so I think that's already covered. My fifth question was with regards to the digitising of the microfiche. Is this cost effective? How often is it requested in comparison to the staff hours required to digitise all this information? And last question on the toolkit. And applaud, you know, the contribution of 84 million that's bringing into the local economy. And we were going to ask, sort of, you know, can this almost be seen, can it be promoted for a start, especially with businesses in, you know, knowing that a planning development can bring money into the local economy. Almost, you know, to a per application, but obviously not, you know, as we discussed, not on an extension, but, you know, each new house can bring in so much development into, give a cash injection into each, you know, community. And finally, it was a suggestion with regards the planning consultee letters that go out. Could there be a hyperlink directing it directly to the application rather than the hyperlink that currently goes to the planning page, and then you have to go back to get the planning application code to find the actual planning application? I just wondered if it could be, there may be a reason why it can't be done, but if there was a direct hyperlink taking it straight to the planning might make access a little bit easier.
Thank you, Councillor Howson. Just on the particular point of enforcement, I'm sure it was a matter of just the description, but there isn't any suggestion that the council has been brought into disrepute around what has clearly been a challenging area, and it's encouraging to hear that that's improving. Just in terms
sorry,
of...
I just emphasise it was anecdotal. We hear these things in sort of in communities, and I'm sure there isn't the case.
Good. So just if I may then ask you to address those questions. Thanks very much, Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, is it okay if I ask my colleague Andrew Jones to come in after me about the enforcement aspect? He leads on that area and it'd be good to get his feedback.
That'd be great, yes, thank you.
In terms of the Welsh Government data, yes, this is frustrating for us as an authority and other parts of Wales as well, my other colleagues across Wales having the same problem. We do need that data to come from Welsh Government. We have got a meeting with them this week, actually, tomorrow, so we'll be discussing that with the planning officers in Welsh Government to say when is this data going to come. Unfortunately, since COVID, that hasn't been forthcoming, so it's certainly an area we need to look at because we need that comparison data across Wales, and it's frustrating we haven't got it, if I'm completely honest, Councillor Howells, and we'll keep working with them to try and get that information moving forward. With regards to phosphates, yes, it's a massive achievement that we are going to be seeking improvements from the 1st of April 2025 in Monmouth and in Abergavenny Landfoist. In terms of reassurances that phosphate stripping will be to the right requirement, that's certainly going to be within Natural Resources Wales and Welsh Water, Welsh Water's gift. These wastewater treatments will have to have environmental permits, which Natural Resources Wales will issue, and it'll be under their environmental regulations and legislation that they'll issue those. So they will be doing that in terms of their requirements. As a council, that will enable us to allow planning developments within that area. We will be consulting Natural Resources Wales on each planning application and Welsh Water to get the input on each individual planning application. So members will have that reassurance when they're considering planning applications on the planning committee that they have those comments in front of them, and it would have gone for those environmental permits, those wastewater treatments. As well as those two big wastewater treatments, Natural Resources Wales are also reviewing all the smaller wastewater treatments across Monmouthshire as well in our villages and our smaller areas. So that is also ongoing, and again they're reviewing those environmental permits to make sure they are fit for purpose and to see if there is any capacity within those permits to allow for development proposals. So in the last 6 months there's been some real significant steps to find ways to mitigate and ensure that water quality isn't adversely affected by development proposals, and we are now able to start allowing development. So this is a really good news story as we move forward. Still a lot of work to be done, particularly in the agricultural industry, but in terms of development proposals, we do have those mitigating factors now to ensure that we can protect water quality in the River Usk and the River Wye. So that is really, really positive. In terms of I'll come on to the enforcement bit, I can pass that on in a moment, but in terms of the microfiche, yes, this is a objective we've had within the department for a number of years. It's going to cost about £30,000 to digitise the microfiche, but it would result in customers being able to self-serve and go online and look at the planning history of their own sites or any development proposals they are looking at, rather than travelling into County Hall and looking at them in quite a manual fashion. So it would make it much more efficient. Whether this cost and value for money is a question. I think certainly from speaking to customers, they would like to see that. It'd be a lot easier for people to access that information. I'll be honest, it is something I'm looking at in terms of budgets at the moment, whether it's something that we can actually afford within the year. And I think that's something that we just need to keep reviewing. It would be a good positive thing. Whether it's value for money is a question mark. I think just being honest and open with regards to that. So it'd be interesting to see if that does progress in the next 12 months. The toolkit, yeah, I think it's, as Phil has outlined, it's a great tool to actually outline the benefits of planning to an area. I think it is a very controversial service that the council runs. There isn't sometimes a winner in terms of development proposal, and there's always somebody who's ultimately upset. If you're refusing a planning application, obviously the applicant's upset. Sometimes if you're approving something, a neighbour or a local resident isn't happy with that development proposal. So it is, it's a difficult one to sort of measure in terms of the impact it has, but that toolkit does show the benefit of allocating land for employment purposes, for educational purposes. It really does ensure sustainable communities when we look at planning decisions. And in terms of ensuring that we do look at planning decisions appropriately, and I know Councillor Howes, you mentioned the approval rate in there. There's a just system there in terms of that there's a clear local planning policy framework which officers work within. They're all educated or being educated within Cardiff University. To review planning policies and to work within them, and there is that planning policy framework was detailedly examined by the planning inspector at the time, and when we take forward the replacement local development plan, that will also be examined to make sure those planning policies are robust and fit for purpose. So I would suggest that the reasons why we're working to approvals and that high approval rate is because we don't just refuse things as they come into the door. We have customer service. We try and work with the customers to get into an approvable rate. We could have a system where the application comes in, it's unacceptable, we refuse it straight away. That's not the service I would want to deliver. I want to work with people to get their development to an acceptable system. So I think that's why the approval rate is a very good measure. And I am assured that officers are working within that planning policy framework. We see a lot more legal challenges if development proposals were being done contrary to planning policy. We would see a lot more of those coming forward. I think they're the sort of questions which I thought I'd cover off, but if I could pass to Andrew in terms of the enforcement aspects, Chair.
Just on the hyperlink to for planning applications.
I think that's something I could take away, I think, with the planning support team. Actually, Andrew's saying that he's got the answer to that. There we go.
Let's go across to Andrew, shall we then, Craig? Andrew.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm Andrew Jones, one of the Development Management Area Managers. Specifically with that question in regards to the letter and the hyperlink, it was something that we looked at when we brought in our back office system, Uniform, which is used now with most authorities, local authorities in Wales. That was something we specifically looked at. It's an obvious win in terms of making things easier for customers, for consultees. The nature of the beast and creating document templates with live hyperlinks that may or may not be created yet, but was unfeasible. It's a technical impossibility, I'm afraid. We did look when we put site notices up as well as consultation letters. We've looked in the past at using QR codes, but again, it's the technical issue of creating a link within a held document template to then link to an ever-changing hyperlink. Every planning application has its own link. We have looked at it. At the minute, it directs you to the search page, which is the nearest available sort of landing destination for a customer to be able to look at the planning application file. You did mention planning enforcement, and Craig has sort of pointed that in my direction as the relevant line manager there. I just wanted to touch on some of the points you'd raised there. I know we have discussed already, I don't want to take up too much time, but I think it's important just to sort of remind ourselves, much of today's discussion has been about the value of planning, and I think it's important to remind that the planning enforcement function, really, it is essentially the backbone of the planning system. It's there to uphold the decisions that are taken by officers, that are taken by members. As we've discussed, and as some of the officers have discussed, we will amend, value in terms of amending applications, seeking improvements and enhancement through planning conditions. And it's the planning enforcement function that underpins that, and to take appropriate action if that's not been accorded with. And so one of the reasons and mentions that's, in terms of performance and our investigation process, that's been the focus in terms of improving the service. And as Phil has noted earlier, Q1 and Q2, significant improvement in terms of percentage in 84 days, much reduced investigation average time, significantly down to around 80 days in both quarters. So the focus has been clear. We're very much central to the audit that took place earlier this year, and that was welcome timing. Actually, it kicked off this financial year and quarter 1 and quarter 2 well, and we've sort of taken on the findings of that, and I think the proof is in the pudding. So I think it'd be nice to sit here this time next year with quarter 3 and quarter 4 with 4 green targets to aim for. I think we're fully staffed now, and the intention is to work more and more closely. I'm sure any members of the delegated panel that are on the meeting today will know we're bringing more and more cases each week, be it expedient or not expedient. Those numbers are going up each week, so it's getting that earlier focus, and credit to the team on the ground at times, in difficult times, to clear the backlog and now process these cases in as timely manner as possible.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to move us along now to Councillor Strong.
Thank you. I want to look at the issue of the appeals that were made. Now, I note there were 11 in the year under consideration, and that's a relatively small number, and I particularly welcome your comments, but that seems to be that's due to good engagement with the applicants, back down the line, and that's a very welcome development. Now, we won 7, but we lost 4. That does raise in my mind the question of the strength, not so much the strength of the appeals, because that's shown in the verdict, but the strength of the appellants. I guess that if you're up against an appeal from a big property developer, they will have a team of legal experts and planning consultants and all the rest of it that you have to deal with. How far have we got it down to sort of the other extreme, where it might just be a local resident who's been denied planning permission, and they, without or with little or no legal advice or whatever, they almost sort of put in a speculative appeal, chuck it in and see what happens. Are we sort of winning against that sort of applicant, but losing against the big boys? Okay, and perhaps, sorry, just what I think of it to add, the cost of this. What sort of costs are we incurring in appeals? Clearly, there's a cost to winning an appeal, but also, I guess, a bigger cost on losing an appeal. If we could have a little bit of general information about that, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. And Phil, are you picking that up?
Yeah, just having a look to see at the 4 examples of the cases we lost last year. So I've just got some, bear with me a moment. Received on, right, let's do it. Right.
Did you want to, Craig, just pick up maybe on the cost of appeals apart from anything else while Phil's looking at that?
Yeah, just as Phil's looking at that, I think last year we reported that we won 100% appeals, actually, Councillor Strong. So I think it is a year-on-year basis. Obviously, it depends on what the development is and the types of decisions that were made. Phil will be able to go into some of that detail now. In terms of the costs associated with appeal, we try and ensure that when we issue the decision from the very outset, that the report is robust enough to be forwarded to the PEDU, the Planning, Environment and Decisions Wales group organisation. When it goes to appeal, that we can issue the same report so that it covers all of the points anyway, it covers all the planning policies, so there's no additional work if the appellant is to appeal the decision by the council. So in those circumstances, there is an additional cost, but obviously with the bigger ones, if there was a bigger refusal, and in all honesty, we haven't had a big public inquiry or a big hearing like that for many years now. So generally speaking, we only allow developments which is allocated, so those bigger people that you're talking about, the bigger developers, we haven't allowed any, we haven't refused anything because they understand the planning system in Wales. If the land isn't allocated for development, it doesn't come forward. And we had a plan-led system in Wales, and that's what we do. So those type of bigger appeals, which would have happened decades ago, don't generally happen now because of that system and the way the system has adapted over time. So the appeals that we're probably looking at, which will come into the detail at the minute, probably smaller stuff. And I think one thing to get over here is that the planning system, it is controversial, as we've already mentioned, but those controversial applications do end up in planning committee. So 5 objections or more, the application automatically goes to planning committee to have that wider democratic discussion. The 60 members of the planning committee review the recommendation of planning officers, and they come to their own independent decision, basically based on the council. So some of these decisions, there's a shared responsibility here, between officers and members. We work collaboratively with the planning committee, but sometimes the planning committee decide, for whatever reason, make a planning balanced judgment that they'll go against planning policy, such as flooding, for instance. They might see the benefits of a development scheme. There was a couple of applications recently where members made a decision that they would go against that. So in some instances, the planning committee feel that an application should be refused, even though officers feel there's enough weight there. So it is a case-by-case basis with some of these appeals decisions, and we'll see a different figure every year, whichever performance review we'll do. And I think it's just about drilling into some of that detail, which maybe Phil has got some of that detail now that we can run into. But I'm not worried about that figure, and I think it will change year on year. I think 7 out of 11 to win is absolutely reasonable, and I think it's right that some of those appeals get allowed as well. It gives us time to review our policy decisions.
Phil, if we could, I don't want to get lost in the detail. It'd be great if we could keep this fairly brief.
Very, very briefly, we had 4 appeal decisions that were allowed. One was actually a member decision at committee for a front extension on a property in Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgoed. Officers had recommended that for approval. It went to appeal, and it was allowed by the inspector, but no costs awarded. No costs were applied for, and none awarded. The other one was an agricultural property in Grove View, Bullyhole Bottom, that was allowed. I haven't got the detail of that, I'm afraid. Another one was a porch on a barn conversion that we thought looked poor in design terms, but the inspector disagreed with us. So a very subjective sort of decision, really. So there we are. We sort of maybe not particularly happy with the decision from the inspectorate, but it is subjective. So that one got allowed. And the last one was the adult gaming centre in Monmouth that I think a lot of us were aware of. We'd refused on the basis that we thought it wasn't the appropriate sort of use right next to the Shire Hall, such an historic part of the conservation area, opposite the Grade 2 star listed building, etc. And we weren't happy with the sort of character of the use in that area that would detract from the conservation area. But the inspector felt that, we just didn't agree, again, subjective view, felt that it would create footfall, increase vitality in the area, and it was a different form of use, but not unacceptable. So again, you could see that going either way, really, depending on the inspector, but we lost it in that instance.
Okay, well, thank you, and actually very helpful detail, but I really appreciate that. And clearly, Councillor Strong does as well. That's really helpful. Just a couple of concluding points and questions, if I may. It's partly just to recognise, in terms of enforcement, it's tremendous and really welcome the very significant improvement that you've shared with us today in terms of current performance. Certainly Q1 and the indications about Q2 are very encouraging. It's to recognise that the performance that has been poor in this, with 290 days before positive action, that has left a consequence of some residents in some communities, and this has been alluded to, I think, by Councillor Howells earlier, losing confidence in that service or that part of the service. And I think it behoves all of us to make sure that we build that back up again. So helping to explain that there has been a capacity issue, and also that there's clear evidence that it's improved and improving, and significantly so. So it's just recognised. I think it's not just a case of, well, we've got the capacity back where we need it. We've got some real work to do there, I think. Just a question, should we, or even do we, prioritise major projects over general projects? General applications running at 89%, and the major applications at 71%. is there a good value for Monmouthshire in prioritising the larger applications? And that broader question: do we do that? Just to recognise on point 7 of the cover report, I really welcome the approach to saying opportunities moving forward, and I strongly commend that approach to other services, looking at opportunities and putting that into performance reports, as opposed to where we tend to be better assessing risks and focusing on what has worked, what hasn't worked so well, but actually focusing on opportunities. Well done. I think that's really good to see. A question which you may perhaps just say a few words about. The idea of us carrying out a performance assessment, it could be said by others that we're marking our own homework, and it's important to remain as objective as we possibly can in that. I've suggested in previous performance assessments that it might be a good thing to involve another experienced planning officer from another authority. It might be Blaen y Gwent, given that we've got a good relationship or work there, just to oversee that and to be able to offer an internal external view, if you get my drift, to just make it as robust as possible, that we're not being subjective in how we apply the categories of good, fair and requiring improvement. Just to make the point, if I may finally, that it looks to me on the third document, the second attachment, your preface describes, quotes, commendable resilience in continuing to investigate and resolve enforcement cases in a timely manner. Now, given that you're doing a reflective, backward-looking performance assessment, that seems to jar against the 290 days before positive action. It doesn't seem to me that both those could be correct, and therefore it undermines that objectivity, which I think is really important, and even more so given that we're doing it ourselves. So just one or two questions, but one or two suggestions as well. Perhaps, Craig, you might want to just address the questions. Or Phil.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I could just come back on the confidence in the enforcement process with Monmouthshire. Yeah, we fully recognise that, and I think that we do want to build greater bridges with the local community, and one of the ways of doing that we thought was to develop some training with community and town councils. It's a little while since we did training with them on enforcement. It is the hot topic, because a lot of people get very wound up, as you know, with retrospective applications. Well, we saw it at Planning Committee, didn't we, recently? So we thought, in terms of focusing on community engagement, that would be a good place to start in terms of building relationships back up to be better with our local community and town councils. So that's something I know that Andrew and myself and Craig are going to be involved in coming next few months, I think, in setting out some training sessions for town and community council, maybe in north and south. We haven't really thought of the process yet, but we'll certainly get into that to try and restore, if you like, our reputation in that sort of area. Thank you.
Yes, Craig, on one or two other questions there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Neil, for your kind words in regards to opportunities and sort of highlighting that the enforcement has improved in this quarter. And Andrew will keep working certainly with the team to ensure that figure does keep going in the right direction. It's certainly something that we are going to be focusing on. And as Phil's alluded to, we do, and I think other council members of the committee have outlined, that we do need to build that confidence up in local residents and local communities again in terms of enforcement. It's an area we know is a weakness, and we will certainly be striving to ensure that we're in those amber greens in next year's annual performance report. And certainly from the first quarter data, it is showing that we are going in that right direction. Now we have a fully resourced team. In terms of the prioritising larger applications, you mentioned, Councillor Neil, is certainly we do work with those bigger developers in terms of those bigger strategic projects. So we do offer those development proposals the opportunity to engage in a planning planning performance agreement with us, which is a sort of it's an additional service that we add for those customers, that they would have set dates that we would hit certain deadlines. So we have sort of a timetable and a Gantt chart over time period, certain dates when that application will go up for consultation. We'll have internal meetings with them, external meetings with external consultees, and also a date when it'll go to planning committee. That's an additional service we offer at a cost, which brings in additional income for the council above and beyond. It doesn't mean that we take our eye off other applications. It means that we can use that income to result in additional resource to that particular application. So it is a good service. It does result in those applications, those strategic applications, going through the system more efficiently, and it is a good way to ensure that we hit those strategic objectives, such as delivering affordable housing. So it is really, really positive in that respect. And we have a very small amount of large applications in Monmouthshire compared to other local planning authorities. So it is good that we do get the resources around them and get those developments right in terms of us being placemakers and ensuring we do get the best out of those development proposals. I think the enforcement aspects have been covered off there, and in terms of those performance, in terms of those assessment from another local planning authority, again, Councillor Neil, we can certainly take that away and we can explore that in terms of whether there could be some external sorts of review of planning, maybe just in terms of the quantitative and also the qualitative measures in terms of development proposals. You know, are they of a high standard? I think there are certainly some development proposals in Monmouthshire I personally would put forward for an award, such as the Fairfield Maybe sites in Chepstow. I think that is, you know, the way that's being constructed at the moment is showing a really, really high standard of development. We've got really good, interesting development there, right on the waterfront, key connections into the town centre. I think it's something that the members should be proud of in terms of what the council's delivered there. But yeah, I can certainly take that away in terms of that external review from other parties, Councillor Neil.
Yes, and just on that point, if I mean, it's not really to answer, but just if you could have a look at the text on the point at the preface of the third report, it just seems to clash with the data in the actual report. The suggestion, Craig, of I'm making is not to conduct another review, but it's to say that while you're conducting your own performance review, it might be a mutual arrangement that we offer to another authority, but to add to the clarity of objectivity and the potential perception of a lack of it, and I'm not suggesting there is, but you know, residents might reasonably say, well, you know, you're marking your own homework. So having another experienced officer that could also express a view might well help in that regard, and we might be able to offer that mutually to them because they'll be producing the same report. Great, thank you for those questions, colleagues, and those answers. We're now going to move on to the next item on the agenda, and just to say thank you to Craig and to Phil and to Andrew for your responses, and also to Councillor Griffiths for your responses, and also for taking time to join the meeting this morning. It's much appreciated. So we're going to move on to item 5. Sorry, I'm going to just move the report and the recommendations first of all before we move on to scrutinise the contents of the annual planning review for 22-23 prior to its endorsement by the Cabinet Member for Planning and Economic Development on the 15th of November prior to submission to the Welsh Government, and I see no objections to that, so we move the report and that's approved. So thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 5, and thank you very much, Councillor Grokup, for joining us and patiently waiting for item 5. And also great to see Will McLean, the Chief Officer here, who's timed his entrance with absolute immaculate sense of timing. We'll move on to this. And as you settle into your seats, you're very welcome. If I could just introduce this item, it's a couple of issues that have been raised at last meeting, last performance and overview, and also at a prior meeting. And it seemed like a good opportunity to perhaps ask for you to provide us with a verbal update and input into, first of all, the concern of what I might describe, and I think could reasonably describe as a collapse in numbers of secondary school students studying foreign languages. and I refer to a report which was commissioned for the year ending last year around this for Wales. And it's recognising this is a Wales-wide, indeed UK-wide issue, but our focus is on Monmouthshire and what we might do. So that's the first particular question area. And the second one being, it's about a year now since just a little bit more than a year since the introduction in September last year, some schools moving it forward into January this year, of 3 science subjects being rolled into 1. And whilst it's too early to assess in terms of GCSE, it would seem a good time frame to understand if there are any positive, negative, or whatever neutral reactions within the school setting or even among employers to that. So, those 2 question areas. So, I don't know, Councillor Groka, if you wanted to go first, or whether Will is doing so, but you're both very welcome.
I'll make a start, Chair, if that's okay, and thank you for the invite. I note from the agenda that my name wasn't on there, but I hope you don't mind me gate-crashing the party.
I'm so sorry that that's the case, but you're very, very welcome. It was certainly not intended.
Thanks.
I hope you received my invitation personally to you anyway.
Indeed you did, and I appreciate that. The way we're going to do this, the Chair has outlined 3 concerns. So I'm going to kick off on the international languages, and Will is going to do something on where we are after the introduction of single science for GCSE in the Welsh curriculum, and a bit of a 50-50 perhaps for when we look at the really serious issues around secondary school attendance. But of course, I would hope this will give us an opportunity for discussion. I think they're interesting topics that have been raised, and I would hope what we'll see in the next few minutes is scrutiny at its best, because I would certainly value hearing the views of members on these topics. They're, as the Chair says, very serious topics, and there are no clear and obvious solutions where we identify difficulties. So I hope it'll be a very positive session, and that's certainly the way that both of us are coming along this morning. So if I could kick off perhaps with just some thoughts on where we are with international languages. And the first thing I need to do is to say I've actually been practicing that for several hours now, because all through my life in education we used to talk about modern foreign languages. The new curriculum for Wales has replaced that with international languages. So your first test today, members, is in discussing this, can you remember to get it right? And there will be points knocked off for anybody that talks about MFL or modern foreign languages. And I will probably be one of those that loses points. The second point I would make before I get into the main points about international languages is that, in a sense, it's difficult to have this discussion without bringing in some comment at least about the role of Welsh as a language in the new curriculum. And so that's not one that I'm going to duck. But of course, the new Welsh curriculum has a really important part to play in the statutory requirement that we now have as an authority to produce 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. And schools will play a very central part in that. And I don't know how many of you watched the BBC 2 programme last night, Union, about the Union of Great Britain. And last night's programme covered the role and the decline in the 19th century of the Welsh language, and its revival in recent years. And it made the point quite effectively, I think, that within this country that we live and work in, Welsh is not a foreign language, it is the language that predates the use of English. and therefore it has perhaps a unique status. And I would like to make the point from the outset that although there are links, and perhaps those links are more emphasised in a border county like Monmouthshire, but the reality is that when the Welsh Government talks about the Welsh language, it is talking about the language of Wales. However, the Chair has referred to the report recently published by the British Council in Wales called Language Trends in Wales 2022. It's a picture of declining uptake and declining numbers of pupils taking international languages in Key Stage 4 and at A level. I think I would like to name in public two of our comprehensive schools in Monmouthshire for their efforts to sustain and develop international languages. They are Caldicot and Monmouth, where numbers of students have been quite clearly encouraged to take languages, and where there is that pressure and the role of language is enhanced, then numbers are still there among students to take them up. Perhaps the challenge is for our other two comprehensive schools to put in the same apparent effort that Caldicot and Monmouth are putting in. It's also worth pointing out that the report spends quite a lot of time talking about international languages at primary school, and the numbers of primary schools introducing an international language is growing rapidly. And I know Will and myself have seen this over the last year or so at Gilwern, where under the new Welsh curriculum, they introduced Gilwern around the world and literally did highlights of as if you were travelling around like Phineas Fogg around the world. I was there on the day they were studying New Zealand. And so there was sport, obviously, but there was foreign language. There was the role of Maori within the communities of New Zealand. And it was a fascinating way that I know has won many plaudits around South Wales and probably beyond for teaching the new curriculum. I'd also say that both Will and I went on separate days, and at the start of this day, everybody that was a visitor was encouraged to take part in a 5K run, which was part of health provision within the school as well. I've seen Will performing this on a video in the school. I have to say he seemed to find it rather easier than me, but we both did our best for Monmouthshire, Will. But let's have a look at some of the detail about where we are in secondary schools and particularly perhaps our older pupils in secondary school. Much of our curriculum work we do in conjunction with EAS. And so when I knew that there was this request to come and engage with you as a committee, we did ask EAS for their comments. And the Welsh Government has established an initiative called Global Futures Initiative, which EAS is an active participant in. And they create an array of opportunities for students to engage in funded activities that includes routes into languages. Cardiff University have a mentoring programme that provides initiative and support. Other higher education institutes and language institutes similarly encourage links and provide mentoring opportunities to school. Monmouth Comp and Osbaston Primary are perhaps worth highlighting as two what EAS call partner schools, and they foster engagement in international language and share practice, not only within the Monmouth cluster and within Monmouth, but within the wider South Wales as well. The curriculum for Wales sees that there is a direct place for international language. It comes under the language, literacy and communication area. And it may be that going back to the origins of the national curriculum, when it first came in, back in Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister at the time, the 1988 Education Reform Act. And after a couple of years, modern foreign language, as it was then, it's not me losing points, was actually reduced in its stature by not being a basic part of the national curriculum. And I think in some secondary schools in England and Wales, it's never got back that status that it lost way back then in the early 1990s. But it is part of the new curriculum for Wales, and younger learners are being encouraged, and maybe that is the hope for the future now, that language in the primary element of schools, foreign language, international languages, become a part of everyday schooling. I've got a granddaughter who's 6, who was born in Oxford, lived in Germany, and now lives in Malta. At the age of 6, she can speak 3 languages. And language to younger children, it's often said, and I think with some truth, does seem to come more easily than certainly to old-timers like me. One point that certainly in discussion with the head at Monmouth that raises its head is the emphasis that in recent years has been put on the STEM subjects, on science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And when students are very clearly given sometimes direct, sometimes subliminal messages that this is where the future is, this is where the money is, that it's quite understandable that young people think that science and technology and computing is the future. But I very much take the view that if we are to remain an internationally competitive country in Wales, that we need our ambassadors who can go to Germany and France and China and Russia and speak the language of the people who they're talking to. And I think we probably do need to get that balance better, and I'd certainly value your views on that. EAS are now starting the process of getting together a regional survey of the situation, so we've got a clearer view of exactly where international languages are within our area of South East Wales. But one thing is clear, and that is that during the pandemic, schools focused on basic skills and well-being. They had to, didn't they? Linguistic ability in the first language has often suffered for many children since the pandemic, let alone a second or a third language. So maybe older pupils have found it extremely challenging when it comes to GCS option time to say, yes, put me in for German, put me in for French or Spanish. And I think that's certainly something worth exploring. Similarly, there is a lack of specialist teachers in those subjects. And again, related to the STEM issue, I think. If you're told, if you're a wizzo in speaking French or German or whatever, come and join our company because we'll have roles for you in our office in Berlin or Paris, and maybe the thought of enhanced salary is a pull away from a traditional role as a language teacher in a secondary school. So it is a very difficult situation that we find ourselves in. The numbers of youngsters taking an international language at A level, having done it at GCSE, has collapsed dramatically since the pandemic. Exactly the same has been seen in Welsh. Welsh GCSE transferring to Welsh A-level numbers have collapsed. And maybe it is to do with this confidence of speaking a foreign language. I don't know. But I agree with you, Chair, that there is a lot to worry about. Let's look at what's happening in the primaries and hope that's a good way forward. But one thing I would like Will to talk about for a moment is ESGOL, which is the new distance learning facility that we're developing in Monmouthshire that I think is quite exciting.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. And just before asking you to pick that and other points up, if I could just bring our attention to really the substance of lying behind this question, just with a few factual numbers coming out of that report that Councillor Grocott has referenced for our awareness and also for any residents who are looking at this. And I think lying behind or underpinning the facts of the experience of the last 7 years in this report is a core question that schools really, they're there to prepare pupils for the world beyond school, and that means not only Wales, of course, but for wherever in the world they might wish to develop their lives and their experience and their work. So the relevance of learning languages to be able to take those opportunities as they develop becomes really important. So just a few setting points, if I may, around this. So as Councillor Grocott correctly referred, the numbers in just this report, and it's not a pre and post pandemic report, it's very much the last 7 years. And actually, if you extend this to the last 20 years, the picture extends very much in the same trajectories, I think, Will, but you'll know more about that than I. And the last 7 years is just the latest years of that trajectory. But for example, in French and in German, which have traditionally been the settings of what Councillor Grocott has referred to as the old modern foreign languages, the GCSE and A-level decline in student numbers has been 44% in French and 48% in German. And in A-level, it's been 44% and 50%. So these are extraordinary numbers. And what they mean in real terms is that at A-level, in 2022, in the whole of Wales, there were just 58 German pupils studying German at A-level, and just 245 studying French at A-level. And when one considers the literally millions of jobs available in these very large economies, as well as in other economies where those languages are spoken as second languages, the question is, does that disadvantage our young people, as it would appear to do? And just if I may, to the final thought, that it's not, of course, only about French and German in a world where we have enormous development of the economies and opportunities for other parts of the world. So the numbers of people speaking English are 1.45 billion people in the world, estimated. Mandarin, 1.2 billion. Hindi, 600 million. Arabic, nearly 400 million. And then French and German, about another 450 combined. So total of 4 billion people on the planet, and of which we are potentially very, very, very significantly reducing opportunities. And it's the very final thought on that being, it seems, from what I understand, Will, that pupils at school are really making option selections at the age of 12 on languages. typically, and it's a very early point because languages are a challenging subject. So whether or not this is about us helping the promotion of the benefits of this for job opportunities, for career opportunities, is part of the question underlying this, really. It's not just about, what's happening, but what actually the effects will be on opportunities for our young people in Wales. So thank you for allowing me just to frame that a little bit. Will, over to you, Will McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Will McLean, Chief Officer for Children and Young People in Monmouthshire. Firstly, thank you to the committee for the opportunity to come and talk about some really important areas today. I'll talk a little bit, if I can, just about some of your observations there, Chair, and then I will touch on the ISCOL developments that we're taking forward in Monmouthshire. You're absolutely right that we have seen this decline in the uptake of French and German and other, what we currently describe as modern foreign languages. I guess Spanish would be included in that block as well, over time. And it's a huge challenge for our secondary schools to manage the curriculum. There are specific things which have to be taught. There are specific things which have value placed on them in terms of the core. The core we understand as being English, maths and the sciences. And beyond that then, the room within the curriculum, and we take into account Welsh, as Councillor Grocott referred to earlier on, we begin to curtail the room within our curriculum offer for a range of things. And then it comes down to what our children and young people are choosing. And I know we're going to talk about science a little later on, and there's a related question around young people looking for career opportunities in the future, the value placed on STEM, engineering subjects and so on. So it's this balance piece around what people are choosing to study because they think it's going to allow them to have the greatest opportunities in the future. And what we also know to be true, that there is a world of opportunities if you're able to access language skills as well. And that's, in terms of our Welsh positioning, in terms of our Welsh and Education Strategic Plan, understanding that the ability to learn and the ability to communicate in a multiplicity of languages is of huge benefit to you. And I think those children who are brought up as bilingual or trilingual in some cases actually have an ability which demonstrates their kind of their opportunities in the future, but also kind of captures their kind of academic opportunities as well. So there are a number of things which I think play into it. Choice and kind of looking ahead, and I think, this is not in any way made as a political point, but things like Brexit will have impacted upon it because it isn't actually as easy to access some of those job markets anymore as it has been in the past. Some of the large-scale exchange programs, I know we've moved to TIThe in Wales, but things like Erasmus and so on are no longer accessible in the way they were before. So some of those things which might have been hooks for learners are no longer as evident as they have been, and that's going to be something which does play into that piece. And I think your point around options at 12, we're seeing a move away from 3-year GCSEs now. In many schools, they're going back to the traditional 10 and 11 being GCSEs, so hopefully that will allow a longer period of learning through Key Stage 3 for languages, and that will allow that kind of love of languages to grow. I think one of the things which we're hearing about positively is with the advent of the new curriculum and the 6 areas of learning and experiences, we're seeing primary schools beginning to develop language learning earlier, and I think that's really positive. If we do that in our primary schools, then hopefully we'll see that continued into Key Stage 3 and that kind of love of language, but also really importantly set aside that or set beside that, sorry, a love of the culture of other places as well, because it's not just about learning the language, it's about learning and understanding the culture of other countries where that language is a key part. So hopefully, if we can continue to do that, and I know there's good work by the EAS in terms of their promotions, we've got some outstanding practice within the county in terms of language provision, and we can really begin to develop that and make sure that we're always promoting the value of languages to our learners. but it is a congested field in terms of learning, and indeed the questions that we've been asked today show some of that tension, because we know that our learners are increasingly turning to the STEM subjects rather than the languages. So in that instance, it does represent a challenge for our schools. One of the ways in which we're trying to increase the take-up at Key Stage 5 is through the ISCOL programme. Through the pandemic, we obviously saw the opportunity for remote learning, and ISCOL is a really kind of developed provision of that blended learning, which means we hope that we will be able to have provision for modern foreign languages across our schools in a shared provision. In the past, it's been much more difficult to do that, but we believe that the new approaches will really make progress in that area. And I'm grateful to my colleague Tim Bird, who's working with us to really look and develop that. And in fact, I think in mid-November, we will launch that in this chamber. So, if members want to come and see how it works, see the technology in use and work with the schools, then they'll be able to do that. And I'll share the date of that. I think in my mind it's the 11th, but I won't say that definitively. So we're really looking to support our schools to make that offer. That's helpful to us because we want more of our children to stay at Key Stage 5, and we want to maintain the breadth of the curriculum offer at Key Stage 5 as far as we can. So we're looking at some innovative ways of doing that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Will. Could we move on to the, well, actually, I think I'll take questions on this area first of all. I see Councillor Bond, you have your hand up before we move on to the issue of science.
Thank you, Chair. It was actually about both. If I could just, first of all, thank you very much, Councillor Grocott and Will. First of all, I'd like to perhaps amend or give the opportunity for Councillor Grocott to amend something he said, that that people being pressured in Caldecott and Monmouthshire to do language, I guess he means actively encouraged. Just put the record straight, I guess.
Yes, I'm more than happy to do that. What I was trying to say was that good teaching will encourage people to develop a love of a subject area. Certainly not suggesting anybody is forced to do it, but rather the quality of the teaching encourages people to take up modern languages. Here we are, I've lost brownie points. International languages.
Okay. I don't want to be misquoted, do you? Okay, so you're saying since the pandemic, and it's sad that there's an aspiration change, it seems like. I wonder and welcome the response, and I think Will's just mentioned it as well, about whether wider strategy decisions have impacted on this. Does the event that happened 7 years ago, and we're saying it's a coincidence that the numbers have gone down for 7 years, was Brexit? And now it's so difficult to train and work in Europe, and we've lost the biggest opportunity for our young people. I was going to go, I'll go on to say that, and 40, 50 years ago, we sold off our industry, and we've reduced investment back into industry and apprenticeships, and money going to stakeholders, shareholders, and we've seen it decline over so many years. And there's investment, as I say, and it's a global situation. And we want to encourage young people to go globally, but also we want them to stay in Britain and develop some sort of industry and some future for our country. This is, as I say, happened over many, many years, and universities and further education colleges have been encouraged to seek payment, or at least be populist in defining what courses they run. So therefore, more and more courses are defined by the people attending, rather than the need for the country or need for industry itself. So unfortunately, life has changed over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and young people don't have the opportunities we had to get good jobs in industry, because we haven't got much industry that's owned by Britain anymore. And not like in our day, when I went to college and I did chemistry, when I started apprenticeship with ICI and did chemistry, and have benefited from that since then. So unfortunately, it's a state of the situation, and hopefully we'll be able to reverse it, but it's not looking good. So we just wondered, I mean, Will's already said Brexit had a link, but are just gone into the science subject as
Thank
well.
you.
There's no opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. And just, if I may, just to make the point that there may be many in this room and many outside the room who would agree about Brexit having a direct impact, but it's just to make the point that Mandarin, Cantonese, Hindi and Arabic are not likely to be directly affected by Brexit. Yeah. And we have extraordinarily low numbers of our young Welsh learners, young adults who are learning any of these subjects, and it would seem like that's a massive disadvantage to them. You make the point that we want those young people, young learners, to become adults who stay in the United Kingdom. My own view would be it's not for us to want any of such thing. It's that wherever they want to go within the world, and it may well be a great thing that they come back here. On the science, and we will be picking up science in a second with Councillor Groka and with Will McLean. My understanding is that there are at least an estimated 60,000, and some estimate 100,000 jobs available as engineers in the UK that cannot be filled by students coming out of our learning institutions in one form or another, schools, FEHE. And therefore, within the UK, there are many jobs available, but that might be a good way into talking about sciences. But I noticed I had noticed Councillor Strong had his hand up, but it looks like you've... All right. I thought you were ahead of Councillor Fuchs, but Councillor Strong, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did.
Councillor Fuchs, did you want to?
He wishes to.
Did you want to go first?
Being a gentleman, I am.
He's saying he's a gentleman, so I'll leave that to others to judge. But there you go.
My hand through this. Sorry, who's going first? Me or Councillor?
Councillor Fuchs, it's to you, Kath.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know. I thought I noticed other hands up in front of mine. I was most confused. Thank you for bringing this item up, Chair, because it's something I'm absolutely passionate about. I first had the opportunity to go abroad age 13 when my kind of newly blended family, shall I say, put 6 kids in the back of a car, a really small Land Rover, because my dad was a farmer, and we drove down to the south of France. And that experience, age 13, gave me a massive interest in all things languages. And I think there are 2 different things happening here, but I'd like to just say a bit more about my experience too. So I went to France, I loved it, I fell in love with the culture. I then got an Erasmus grant. I was the first in my family to go to university. I got an Erasmus grant to go to France for 2 years of my degree. It was absolutely amazing. I became fluent in French. I did my thesis in French. I did work experience in French. I did my finals in French. I then had the lovely fortune of meeting a Catalan who I'm now married to, so I've learned Catalan. So I'm fluent in Catalan and French, and I'm a Welsh learner, dwi'n dysgu Cymraeg. And what I've learned from going to Catalonia and from my own experience of learning French is that the younger you start a language, the better. And in Catalonia, like a lot of families here, you have bilingual children brought up in Catalan and Spanish households, learning both languages. So my husband can speak about 5 languages. Because he grew up there. And I think what we're doing is absolutely right. Having this target of 1 million Welsh speakers is brilliant. And it's fantastic that we have all these primary schools teaching our children our language of this country. And that if you instill a love of languages, and we start with Welsh at primary school, what that can do is then take people out to other languages. And the important thing is just to start a language early. And I know people, I'm a governor at Monmouth Comprehensive, as some of you may know, and they've got such great language teachers there, and they try so hard. And I know that, for example, one pupil who left 2 years ago, who did modern languages at A-level, got a place at either Cambridge or Oxford, I can't remember which one, studying modern languages. So I think all our schools, I mentioned Monmouth Comprehensive, but I know all our schools have got great language teachers, but we've got a shortage. We must invest more in language learning. And we can all, ourselves, there are loads of online Welsh courses that we can go to and learn Welsh ourselves. But my point is we need to invest in language teachers for the future. I agree with Jill that some of this may be Brexit, but the second point, Mike, that I wanted to make is that it could be also the cost of living crisis, because people are unable to afford to go on holiday because of the dire state of our economy in the UK. And I think that experience for me, age 13, was absolutely pivotal to everything I've gone on to do. And I just think that that's so sad that people are not now, they're struggling to put food on the table. They can't afford to go to France, get a passport, visas, etc. I mean, it's really, really difficult. So those were the points I wanted to make. I'm really pleased to hear from Councillor Grocott and Will that we will continue to invest in our languages. And I just want to agree with you, Chair, that they are extremely important to our future as a country. Oh, one more quick point. I'm really lucky. I've got two sons, one doing physics and one applying to mechanical engineering. So there we go. We've got two engineers in the making, both coming out of Monmouth Comprehensive.
Fantastic, and you might want to point them towards Hereford, where they've developed a new engineering university in the last, an FE development in engineering. Great to hear. Yeah, thank you for those comments. I think they're more to be heard than to necessarily respond to. It's very good to hear you reaffirming the importance of investing in this area, and I guess part of the reason for raising this is that many of these trends may be happening elsewhere, but we're all interested in Monmouthshire and what we might be able to do about Monmouthshire. The trends are far greater than just the last year or two. The trends, this is a 7-year report up to 2022, so I think we can discount the economic factor in regard to that. And also that holidays abroad, there are more holidays being sold now than there were pre-pandemic for people going abroad. So there still does appear to be a huge connection with even the European countries, but what about all the other worldwide countries where languages are also so important, and that we may need to raise our game in terms of Cantonese and Mandarin and Arabic and Hindi and other languages where our young people will have wonderful opportunities. It's a very interesting whole area. Will, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to comment on there. It was just really to recognise, I think, what Councillor Fuchs is saying, yeah?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Great, thank you. So moving across to, and I know Councillor Powell was trying to raise her hand on the screen and it wasn't working, but if I take Councillor Strong first of all, then I know you were trying, Councillor Powell, and we'll then move to Councillor Howells. Councillor Strong.
Thank you, Chair. As a fan of George Orwell, it was lovely to hear Councillor Fuchs give a homage to Catalonia. From what's been said before, it's clear that we have not just a Welsh but a UK long-term trend in the decline of languages. I suspect, therefore, it would be one measure of success of the new curriculum in Wales that it manages to buck that trend. We won't know that for a few years because it's only just coming into secondary schools, of course, and it will only be when they get into what used to be called Key Stage 4 that we will see if that's actually happening. Picking up on the figures that you gave us, Chair, about the decline in uptake for languages at GCSE and at A-level, around about somewhere between 45–50% over whatever number of years that was. Now, it's interesting that the figures are about the same for GCSE and A-level, and that would suggest that the reason that A-level is going down is because the pool of those who've taken GCSE in that language has gone down. Clearly you can't do A-level French unless you've done GCSE French. I almost said O-level French, that would really have dated me. So it would seem therefore that the key is to increase the numbers doing GCSE, and therefore A-level to some extent will look after itself. Now that does raise the question that Councillor Grocott said he was not going to duck, but I think perhaps did duck, is has the introduction of Welsh into the curriculum as a compulsory subject had an impact on take-up of international languages, as you now call them? Now, theoretically, this could work in two ways. It could be that students doing Welsh feel maybe that, well, I've got one different language, I've got a second language, why do I need another? Or it might be that their experience of learning Welsh has not been as great as it might have been, and therefore they've shied away from other languages. That could happen, and I know it has happened in some cases. Equally, it can work the other way, but a student coming up having learnt Welsh in school, in nursery as well as in primary school, has developed an awareness of another language, and that might knock on to feel, well, if I could do Welsh, I could do French or German or whatever. It strikes me that I don't suppose the research has been done into that, and therefore probably, Councillor Grocott, I can forgive you for not dealing with that, because I don't think anybody really knows the answers to that. But what it does mean, that that does need to be closely monitored over the next few years, and a way found, because I'm not arguing here in any shape or form for a reduction in Welsh, but we do need to find a way to keep Welsh in its proper place in the curriculum, but also to ensure that languages have that similar place. And it's a nightmare. I mean, in my day and age, there was always a struggle for students to do your subject when they got to Key Stage 4. For example, I was a history teacher, and we had battle royals with the geographers, of course. And now it's, in some ways, it's I won't say even worse, but even more complex, because there are more subjects in the curriculum. The rise of media studies, the rise of psychology, for example, that I'm familiar with. So it's a big problem, but we do just need to monitor it closely to see how we can get that balance that we need.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. I know Councillor Grocott will want to briefly just comment perhaps on that. Just to the setting for the relationship that you raised to your point about GCSE and A-level, on the numbers in the report, and it's a 7-year period that it covers. The numbers studying French and German at A-level are less than 10% of the numbers who studied GCSE. So there's a very, very fundamental relationship issue between these numbers, and recognizing that there is a relationship between all A-level students and all GCSE students that also need to be taken into consideration. But that's a very, very marked low point. It means that the actual numbers of young people learning those subjects in Wales last year were, as I was saying earlier, 58 German at A-level and just 245 French at A-level. So whatever way we split the numbers, these numbers are extraordinarily low.
Oh, I'm not denying that for a moment. That's absolutely true, but it remains a fact that the more you have doing GCSE, the more you're likely to get doing A-level, and 10% probably isn't a particularly different sort of ratio for a number of other subjects as well.
Thank you. And Councillor Grocott, did you briefly want to comment on what Councillor Strong said?
Yes, he has picked me up on not answering my own question, so I will. The curriculum and the balance within the curriculum has always been there for the head and the teachers and the governing body. The new curriculum, of course, will enable every school in Wales to shape its own curriculum in a way even greater than it ever has in the past. But the point I would make to answer your question, yes, it is too early to get some hard figures perhaps, but the best schools find it is not a dilemma. I've quoted Monmouth as a school where international language is promoted effectively, and Councillor Fuchs has borne testament to that. It is also a school, even though it is on the border with England, that promotes the teaching of Welsh very effectively. And they find that there is no conflict between the two, or rather that there is a conflict, but it is managed effectively to the benefit of both.
Thank you. And Will?
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, just a cursory glance at the at Google. The position in England, is very similar. So the point around Welsh is obviously a factor in Wales, but the decline in England looks very, very similar. Spanish seeing some growth, French dropping by a third, German more than halving. So it's clearly a piece around both nations. I think the one thing that this particular article does illustrate, and I would just mention as well, is the nature sometimes of the accountability measures that are applied to schools can have an impact. So in old money, as it were, we used to talk about a level 2 plus, a level 2 inclusive, which was those pupils who achieved 5 good GCSEs, i.e. those graded A star to C, and including English and maths. So if that's your measure, if that's what you're going to be judged by, you're going to try and engineer your curriculum to ensure that you stand the greatest level of success of children getting English and maths and just 3 other GCSEs, because that's what you're going to be judged by. In the same way, in England, the reforms by the Minister at the time, who I think was Michael Gove, took away the requirement to do a language. So these kind of national policy decisions do have an impact at a local level. Positively, the measure in Wales now is the CAP 9. So that's the point score equivalent to your 9 best level 2 qualifications. It has to include the core of English, maths and science, but then there are 6 other slots for you to fill. So it's not 5 anymore, it's 6. So actually the chance of Welsh and another language being included in there is far more likely. So hopefully some of those national policy position changes will enable and give the freedom of that curriculum. And I think it's only in time that we'll see the impact of the freedom of the curriculum for Wales in primary school translate through into the secondary school. And that's going to be, a key challenge in the future.
Thank you, Will. Councillor Powell.
Thank you very much. When I was at school, which is back in the dark ages, French was compulsory all the way through secondary school, right up in 6th form. If you wanted to do German or Spanish, you had to wait till you were in the 6th form, then you could do it. What I really wanted to ask today is, back here a few years ago, I know that it was, money's scarce, isn't there? We know that all schools are struggling with money, that because there were so few pupils at the one school wanting to do German, I believe they were put that if they wanted to do it, they'd have to do it with another school. And I think this is going to be some of the problems, is the fact that if you've only got a few pupils wanting to do a language, then the school has to think, can we afford to have a teacher just for those few? And the other thing I haven't heard mentioned much is Spanish. Now, I believe isn't Spanish the most spoken language in the world, in all these different countries? Have I got that wrong? But you do hear about French and German all the time. But I think it is a problem getting them interested in it, and also the having the finance and enough teachers to be able to teach all the different languages. I'm not so worried about Welsh, because with Welsh, primary school all the way through, Welsh is there. So the children coming on now, they're speaking language automatically almost. So I think Welsh will always survive.
Thank you. And well, just briefly on that, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely, very briefly. In terms of the there is, schools are hugely pressured in terms of their financial position, as is the local authority, and there will be, I think, an increasing scrutiny of small class sizes post-16, because it does create a position within the school in terms of where resources are allocated. That's why I think developments like the ISCOL provision, which is the remote learning, has the opportunity to actually reduce that and actually enable the continuation of languages, but reduce that cost, because there'll be a shared opportunity across schools.
Thank you, Will. Thank you, Councillor Powell. And Councillor Howell, we need to keep it fairly brief, Councillor Howells.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try to keep it very quick. But just to say, really, I'm an example of bilingualism. I grew up as Welsh as my first language. My parents moved to London when I was very young, and I didn't have any English, so I had to learn English. And I take on board, sort of the benefit of being a youngster and absorbing it all, because I never actually thought I was learning it. It was just a way of life. In West Wales, of course, sort of where I'm from, I go back frequently, and it's quite the norm there. You go into a shop or a cafe, and you'll just order things in Welsh. It's very different to our border county, so we're lots of different issues there. I do think, was there a heyday of the uptake of languages? Maybe, I don't know, I'm thinking we've got a twinning association in Usk. It was very active back in the 80s. It's been going 40 years. It's kind of dwindled away now, and lots of exchanges and friendships formed there. So I just wondered if there's any lesson that could be learnt there. I hear Councillor Fuchs refer to sort of exchange students. Was that more prominent back in the 70s and 80s? Did we do more then? Sort of getting those youngsters more engaged and, wanting to learn languages. Was there more pen friends? Did we do more with pen friends? All those things that form things for youngsters that want to do things. So is there any lessons that we could learn there? I was very fortunate on Friday to go to the Young Ambassadors Conference at Gilwan Outdoor Adventure Centre. They were learning about sports there and mentoring, sort of how they can be applied. So the year 6s were there, but the ambassador scheme is with the year 5s and 6. And I was just wondering if there's more fun activities that you've got planned, maybe with the ambassadors, that they can take back to their schools to really, I think refer to culture, not just learning a language, but, learning about the culture and making them want to really engage with it. So I don't know if there's anything we can do with our younger pupils in primary level. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Howells.
Just very briefly, I think, yes, it's interesting isn't it, when you look back, and I was the beneficiary of things like French exchanges and so on, and living and doing work experience in France for a period of time. So I think they're really interesting. I think sometimes there are more challenges these days in terms of some of the safeguarding controls and so on, which we have to put around things. Homestays and all those kind of things are slightly more problematic than they have been in the past. But I think you're right, there is something which we can do. And I think the other thing is making sure that everyone's as aware of the really, positive things that can come. You're right to mention the cultural aspects, absolutely. The idea around having mentors and making sure that our young people are aware that doing languages doesn't close doors, it really opens doors, I think is really important. So, the careers could range as widely as, the GCHQ as all the way around to kind of just working abroad as well. So there's all that kind of that whole gambit of things you could actually think about doing. So we've got to get people to promote that. And I think that's a positive way to engage our young people.
Thank you.
Just on a point of Councillor Strong made about, I always felt an advantage as a youngster learning languages, and I enjoyed it because I had the two languages that I could link, sort of familiar words, so that in French or German I could think, well, there were similar words. So I always felt as if I had a slight advantage. I'm not sure if that's a scientific study though. So, but I always felt that it was more natural for me to want to learn another language.
Okay, I think what we're going to need to do is move on because we've still got science to pick up, and I'm conscious of time, everybody. So the question around science was really just any early indications around the change in the new curriculum from 3 separate sciences to 1, and whether there are any early indications, any lessons that we can pick up from that, such that we may need to think about doing things to support or recognise what's happening. Thank you, Will.
Yeah, I'll pick up the science if that's okay. So, the chair is absolutely right. So in the new Welsh GCSEs, there will no longer be 3 separate sciences on offer. Pupils will all study a dual science award. This was subject to quite extensive consultation by Quals Wales, Qualifications Wales to give them the full title. And if members would be interested, I'm happy to share the link to the outcome of that consultation process. There was a significant range of views presented by the professions and by schools with regards to the way forward. But Qualifications Wales did make the decision to move to this one qualification, and they had 2 significant pieces of evidence that they used to justify that. The first was that universities do not see candidates with separate science qualifications as preferable over those who have a double qualification. In fact, universities prefer candidates with a wide range of qualifications. qualifications, which actually might play back into that conversation we've just had about languages. And the data held by the WJEC, which compared A-level results of pupils who had studied separate sciences versus double award at GCSE, showed no advantage from studying the separate sciences. So those are the pieces of information from Quals Wales. Through the EAS, which is our regional school improvement partner, we continue to work with the WJEC in terms of the development of a new qualification, and that sole focus is to make sure that there is no disadvantage to those learners as they progress from GCSE into Key Stage 5 and A-levels. Just a couple of things in terms of timing. So the new GCSEs will start to be taught in 2025 with assessment in 2027. So we're still a little way off in terms of their actual kind of impact. The other thought, of course, is that this shouldn't be considered solely in terms of the trajectory from GCSE to A-level, but it could also be considered into the trajectory of learning and pathways from GCSE into a range of work-based learning, apprenticeships, other level 3 qualifications as well. So it's not only the trajectory from GCSE to A-level which is important. The second point is around that in the new qualification that pupils will have to demonstrate an in-depth understanding of biology, chemistry and physics in both years 10 and 11, and how they develop that will be important as they link through the different disciplines as they go forwards. Just in terms of the clarification of what the qualification will offer, the future qualifications will award a grade for each discipline within the science as well as an overall grade. So, for example, a learner could receive a B for their biology, an A for chemistry, a C for physics, and overall receive a double B grade for their dual GCSE. And so when it comes to being the sixth form, if I'm making suggestions or guiding students as to how they progress and choices they make at the end of their compulsory education, we'll be able to see that level of detail about where their strengths might lie and what they might choose to do in the future. So in terms of the advantage or disadvantage, coming back to the first fundamental point that Quals Wales cited in terms of Monmouthshire learners looking forward into their potential university careers as well, if the universities don't themselves see separate science qualifications as being advantageous, then there's no reason why in the Welsh setting Monmouthshire learners should be disadvantaged as we look forward. And I think even at the time of the announcement, and I think it would be fair to say that our secondary head teachers were not universally supportive of it, and I think there was significant pushback from some of our schools. The learned societies, physics and so on, were in agreement with the move. I think that took some by surprise, but I think it was the position that they articulated back into the consultation process. So, and as I say, I'm happy to share those notes of the consultation processes with members of the committee. And I think the third area, just in terms of expediency, Chair, you talked about was around engineering, and you mentioned earlier the potential for 60 to 100,000 jobs being available. I think, again, this is really part of the new kind of curriculum for Wales really responding in different ways to the opportunities that present. So as an example, at the moment, I hope all members are very aware of the new school that's being built in Abergavenny. We're seeing schools respond to different needs in terms of different sectors. So King Henry VIII has this year launched a GCSE in construction. That's being supported by the construction industries who are working on site. They have both supported the school, but they're also kind of able to provide kind of a learning experience for those children as that kind of qualification develops. So we're seeing the curriculum change and be responsive to those new demands. It is an area, of course, that links back, I think, in some of the feedback we've had from our head teachers to the first point of conversation today about modern foreign languages, that there is inevitably a point of competition between STEM and languages. I suspect we want to get to a position where there isn't that level of competition, and students are able to choose both. But it seems as though at the minute that the STEM subjects are proving attractive. Whether that has something related to the fact that because children want to see a pathway into kind of vocational delivery and so on, they want to be able to see a trajectory which is leading to employment. That might be one of those things. So I hope that helps in terms of some of those science questions. I'd be happy to take any questions if I'm able to today.
Thank you, Will, and it's very informative and helpful indeed, to understand that wider view of where the universities and potentially also FE, how they view this development. It is interesting also that there seems to be something of a dichotomy of those views with many in school settings, and I just wondered if that itself was proving to be something of a barrier, something of work to be done to ensure that it's not just the imposition of a new curriculum, but if within the schools there are many who don't believe that this is the best way forward, that we're addressing that particular issue.
I think I guess in the development of the curriculum in Wales now enables there's two parts to it, isn't there? There's the development of the curriculum and the learning and the teaching that children experience, and then how that marries into an external examination at the end of Key Stage 4. I think the flexibility and the creativity that the new curriculum offers should empower an opportunity for teachers, particularly of science, to be constructive, to work across their disciplines within schools, and that should engage learners is what you would hope in that sense. And I guess the continuation of integrated GCSE would allow that to come to fruition. I think the continued identification of outcomes per element of the sciences should give those teachers a degree of confidence that their specific skills and knowledge are not being lost, and I think it also will help them as they kind of transition, if we think about those children transitioning to A-level, to do that successfully. I think the proof will be when we see the first couple of years of outcomes of the new GCSEs from summer 27 onwards, and the impact that then has in 2029 of the first set of A-levels that are sat. And I think that's the point in time which we'll understand the implication of what it has been. It does serve to illustrate the length of time that any change like this actually takes to come to fruition.
Thank you, Will. That's very helpful indeed. I see no hands up on this particular area, and so I'm going to suggest we move on. And Councillor Grocott, please do. Yes, thank you.
One very brief comment that I think is pertinent to the discussion we've had this morning. When I was at university in the late 1960s, excuse me, friends of mine who were doing chemistry were expected to have German O-level. And if they didn't have German O-level, they had to take it at university. Because in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, Germany was dominating the world of chemistry to such an extent that many of the papers and so on that they were reading were in German. And maybe since then, language and science have become seen as totally separate. Certainly when I went to university, there was a much closer link, and maybe we should be trying to get back to that.
Thank you. It's a very interesting point. Will, were you looking to come in on that?
Not on that point.
Oh, please, yeah.
So I'm just going to mention, and I don't know what your thoughts are, Chair. I think in the initial email we had from the committee about areas that wanted to cover off today included attendance and examination outcomes.
Please do, yeah.
What I was going to actually suggest was that in order for us to cover attendance in a meaningful way, it would be much better for us to bring a written report to you, which will allow us to cover the last full academic year and what we've seen for the first part of this academic year so far. So I'm happy to commit for us to do that for you.
Thank you, that would be very helpful.
And I'll work with Hazel and Robert to identify a date for that. And the second part around examinations was a point of clarity for the committee. we have to be very careful in the new kind of accountability regime around what we do with the examination results. This year, for the first time in a long time, Welsh Government are going to publish what's referred to as the All Wales Core Data Set, which captures how all schools perform in the CAP 9, which is the qualification I referred to earlier. Schools will have their performance identified against what we refer to as a family of schools, which will be a family of like schools when they take into account a range of factors such as the number of children entitled to free school meals, the number of children who have additional learning needs and so on. It would be my proposal that we prepare an all-members briefing on the approach to accountability within the new GCSE framework, but then in future we bring back a specific report in the new year to this committee in terms of the outcomes of learners in Monmouthshire.
Thank you, Will. That's very helpful. And to your point on attendance, just for colleagues and for anybody watching, the reason for requesting some input on this is that there are some data sets that look very concerning in regard to attendance, and potentially particular groups where attendance itself is concerning indeed, in the high 80%, but we'll delve into that further when you're able to produce that report, so thank you. So I'm going to end that particular agenda point, and thank you to Councillor Grocott and to Will for your contributions to this and responses to the questions. And colleagues, we'll move on to just identifying on the agenda item 6, the forward work plan and action list as ever. Thank you again. On this? Yes. Yeah. So as ever, any particular points that you wish to draw to our attention in that, please do so outside the meeting. You're always very welcome. And Robert, I think you wanted to add something.
Yes, just a couple of things. Just to say, first of all, just to confirm that the COVID learning and pandemic preparedness item has been confirmed for March. It was tentative on the work programme as published on the agenda. Just also to remind everyone that there is the 14th of November joint scrutiny with people, just because it says at the end of this agenda that our next meeting's 22nd of November, but just remembering that there's that one on the 14th as well. A slightly larger point is about all of the work programme as a whole. You'll see at the end of the work programme, we've already put some bullet points about items for possible future scrutiny coming out of the community and corporate plan. We're going to email a list of topics coming forward for future decision in more detail to you, and then we thought we could discuss that potentially at the next meeting about what to include in the work programme, moving forward and into the new year. But as part of that, I've just been notified during this meeting that there's a community and corporate plan performance update report that's coming forward, but the timing would be such that the only real time we could scrutinise it would be January. So but I'm conscious now that we're missing a few members to have a proper discussion about this without their input. But perhaps as part of that email, I'll just include some information about that, because essentially it would need to be January, but we don't have a meeting in January, so we'd have to add a special, and there's potential then that we could bring in some of these other items, so it's not just one item for a single meeting. But that's just something to consider. I don't know if it's just worth at this point getting anyone's impression of whether they'd want a joint a special in January.
By all means do that, but I think given that we've lost quite a few members of the committee, we're probably best to do this by email to include everybody. But if there are any particular points anyone wanted to raise, would that be acceptable that we look for views by email to make sure everyone's on the committee is involved? But thank you, Robert. That's important, and particularly the 14th of November in our diaries. Yep. Okay, so we also have as ever, the Council and the Cabinet work programme on the item 7, and just to approve the minutes of the last meeting, if I see no objection to that, and approve the meetings, the minutes of that meeting. So we've got the 14th of November and then the 22nd of November, and I look forward to seeing you all then. Enjoy what hopefully will be a slightly drier day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.